wind screamed across the frozen plains that night, cutting through cloth and flesh like a knife, carrying with it the taste of iron and snow, the sky heavy with clouds that smothered the moon until even the stars refused to shine. And in the center of that merciless dark, a group of men dragged her, their boots grinding into the ice, their breath steaming, their hands rough as rope around her wrists, her body stumbling, half frozen already. And though her lips bled, she did not scream. She had no strength left to fight. She only let the snow swallow her footsteps, for somewhere deep in her chest she believed this was the end, that this lake, black as a coffin beneath the ice, would be her grave, the place where her name would vanish like frost in the sun. The men spoke little, their voices sharp, cruel, the kind of voices that knew the weight of a gun and the ease of spilling blood. They called her thief, witch, liar, and worse, none of which mattered anymore, because she knew the truth. They were not dragging her here for justice. They were dragging her here for silence, for revenge, for the kind of violence men do when no law rides close enough to stop them. And as the lake appeared through the storm, wide and endless, its surface glimmering faint under the shifting clouds, she felt her knees weaken, not from fear but from the terrible acceptance that this was it, that no one was coming, and in the hollow of her heart she whispered a prayer, not for herself but for the mother she had lost and the brother she had failed. Her captors laughed as they reached the center of the lake, the sound echoing like wolves. They lifted her, ready to break the ice, ready to leave her body beneath the black water where no spring thaw would ever bring her back. And she closed her eyes, waiting for the cold to take her. But then it came, sharp, deafening, final. The crack of a gunshot splitting the night, rolling across the lake like thunder, and everything stopped. The men froze, their laughter cut short, their eyes snapping to the tree line at the shore, and there in the distance stood a stranger, rifle still smoking in his hands, his shadow tall against the storm, his voice carrying over the wind, calm and deadly. Let her go. And for the first time in hours her heart jolted, not with fear but with something she thought she had lost, hope. And though she did not know who he was or why he had come, she knew one thing, that his single shot had cracked more than the silence. It had cracked fate itself, and the night was no longer theirs alone. The night now belonged to whatever force had sent him. And if you want to know how this frozen trail twists into blood, redemption, and fire, ride with me into the next chapter, and don't forget to subscribe, because the story is only just beginning and the storm has much more to reveal. The echo of that single gunshot still hung heavy over the frozen lake, rolling away into the storm as the men tightened their grip on the girl, their faces pale now, their bravado cracking like ice under weight. Because in the West, a lone man with a rifle meant one thing. Death was closer than law, closer than mercy, and though the stranger had spoken only 2 words, they cut deeper than any blade. His stance calm, his shadow steady, his hat brim low against the snow, and the silence that followed was worse than the shot itself, the kind of silence that makes killers hesitate. One of the men cursed under his breath, trying to laugh the fear away, but his voice quivered and the girl felt it through the grip on her arm. She opened her eyes, frost clinging to her lashes, and in that moment saw the stranger's gaze locked on her. Not on the men, not on the gun, but on her, as if she was the reason he had crossed the storm, as if fate itself had tied them before she even knew his name. Then the wind rose, carrying ice like needles across the lake. The men shifted, whispering to each other, debating whether to fight or flee, and still the stranger did not move. He only lifted the rifle again, slow, deliberate, the barrel glinting faintly in what little light the clouds allowed, and the leader of the men spat, shoving the girl hard to the ice, stepping forward with his hand near his revolver. But the stranger's second shot cracked before he could blink, the bullet striking the frozen surface inches from his boot, ice splitting wide with a jagged groan, and the message was clear. One more step, and the lake would claim him before the rifle did. Fear rippled through the group, their courage draining with the warmth from their bodies, and the leader snarled a curse, jerking his head toward the shore. The others dragging their feet as they backed away, muttering, spitting, but not daring to test the man who stood like an iron ghost at the tree line. And just like that, they left her there on the ice, broken, freezing, breath shallow, the stranger lowering his rifle at last as the men vanished into the storm, his boots crunching slow and steady as he crossed the frozen stretch toward her. And when he finally knelt beside her, lifting her head gently from the snow, she wanted to speak, but her lips would not obey, her throat raw from cold. He studied her face with eyes that carried 1,000 miles of dust and loss. And when he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost tender. "You're safe now." But she knew better. No one was ever safe in this land. And as the storm howled louder around them and the black water of the lake groaned beneath, she realized this was only the beginning, that his gunshot had not saved her from death but dragged her into a deeper story, one that would test not only her strength but his soul. And if you're still with me, if you want to feel the fire that comes after the ice, then don't leave the trail here. Subscribe now, because the third chapter is where blood meets destiny, and the frozen night begins to burn. The storm had not eased by the time the stranger carried her from the lake, his arms strong despite the weight of her frozen body, each step sinking into snow that reached to his knees, the wind clawing at them both as though the land itself wanted to finish what the men had started. And yet he pressed on, his jaw set, his eyes scanning the dark horizon for shelter, every movement precise like a man who had walked through death before and learned how not to stumble. She could barely cling to consciousness, her mind drifting between flashes of memory, her brother's laughter, the fire in her mother's eyes, the way the men had dragged her across the snow like a rag doll, and now this stranger, faceless through the blur of frost, yet somehow more real than anyone she had ever known. She felt the warmth of his coat as he wrapped it tighter around her, heard the steady rhythm of his breathing, and in that rhythm she found herself tethered to life again. But the night was not empty, not anymore, for behind them shadows moved. The men who had fled regrouped, their rage sharpening into a hunger for revenge. They were not the kind to leave a trail unfinished, not the kind to forgive being humiliated on their own ground. And though the stranger's rifle had sent them scattering, they were wolves now, circling, waiting for a chance to strike. And he knew it. He felt it in the wind, the way the silence cracked between the gusts, the way the snow seemed too heavy, too watchful. He found an old cabin half buried at the edge of the woods, its timbers groaning under the weight of years, its door half torn from rusted hinges, and there he laid her down near the cold stone hearth, striking flint until sparks finally gave them a flicker of fire, the glow painting his face for the first time, carved by scars, worn by loss. Eyes haunted but steady, she whispered then, her voice cracked and small. Why did you save me?" And he paused, staring into the flames, before answering with words that felt heavier than the storm itself. "Because once someone didn't." And with that the cabin fell silent except for the roar of wind outside. And though she could not yet move, could not yet fight, she understood that his past was chained to hers now, that the same darkness which had tried to swallow her had already taken something from him long ago. And as the fire crackled and the shadows deepened, the crunch of boots sounded in the snow outside. Many boots, too many. The men had returned, rifles in hand, fury burning in their voices as they called out threats that sliced through the wind. And the stranger stood slowly, his rifle in one hand, his revolver in the other, his silhouette tall against the firelight, ready to face them. And she knew the frozen lake had only been the first trial, that the real blood was about to spill here, in this cabin at the edge of nowhere, where the storm would decide who lived and who became part of its legend. And if you want to feel the gunfire crack through the night and watch the fire spread, walk alone. And if you've followed this far, if you've felt the ice, the fire, the fear, and the hope, then you know this story is not the end, but only the beginning. And for more tales that ride the edge of life and death in the Wild West, make sure you subscribe now, because out here every shadow has a story, and the next one might just be darker than this. Through the snow, don't turn away now. Subscribe, because Chapter 4 is where life and death balance on a trigger, and everything changes forever. The cabin wall shook with every gust as the men closed in, their torches flickering like the eyes of demons through the storm. The girl huddled near the fire, too weak to stand, but her heart pounding like a drum inside her chest, while the stranger moved with the calm of a man who had already seen his death and was not afraid to meet it, his rifle resting against the window frame, his revolver heavy in his hand, the firelight carving shadows across his scarred face. And outside their voices rose, curses and promises of pain, the kind of words that left no doubt they would tear the cabin down, just to bury the two of them beneath it. The first shot came fast, a crack of glass and splinters as a bullet tore through the wall, grazing the stranger's shoulder, and yet he didn't flinch. He only steadied his aim and answered with fire, the blast of his rifle shattering the night, a scream echoing as one of the men fell into the snow, the others howling with rage, returning fire in a storm of lead and flame. The cabin rattled. The girl pressed her hands to her ears, praying the walls would hold, praying the stranger's bullets would not run out. and still he fought. Each shot precise, measured, as if every bullet carried the weight of his past, and every kill was another debt paid in full. The fire in the hearth grew, smoke curling through the cracks as if the cabin itself had joined the battle. And then the leader appeared at the door, torch in one hand, revolver in the other, his eyes burning with hate, his words sharp and cruel. "You should have left her, stranger. She ain't worth dying for." And before the last syllable faded, the stranger fired, the bullet tearing through the torch, flames exploding as the leader stumbled back, screaming, the fire catching the dry timber. And suddenly the cabin became a furnace. The smoke thick, the heat blistering, the girl coughing as the stranger pulled her up, his arm around her as he forced a path through the blaze. The men outside shouted, some firing blindly, others backing away as the cabin collapsed behind them. And in the chaos, the stranger's revolver spoke again, each shot carving space until the snow was stained dark, until silence swallowed the storm. And when it was done, he stood in the center of it all, the girl weak but alive in his arms, the flames consuming what was left of the cabin, and the snow falling heavy. Trying in vain to smother the fire, his chest heaved, his eyes still burning as he looked down at her. And in that moment she understood the truth, that he had not only saved her, he had chosen to defy the very law of this land, the law that demanded blood for silence and silence for blood. And though the night had nearly taken them both, his single gunshot had changed everything, carved a new path through the storm, one that neither of them could